Welcome to the Conservative Alliance podcast that discusses everything from a libertarian conservative twist. I'm James, and today we'll be talking about the UK Liberty Party with Harley. On today's show, we're going to be discussing the UK Liberty Party. These types of episodes are going to be called Meet the Party, where we invite representatives from all the small parties which are right of centre in the UK onto our show to discuss what their party is all about. Harley is a coordinator at UK Liberty Party. I'd like to thank him for joining me.
No problem. Thanks for the invitation.
It's absolutely fine. This isn't the first time me and Harley have spoke before. We've known each other, 2-3 years now?
Yeah,
Ish?
I'd say about 2 years. I think we met for the first time in person in Milton Keynes at the Libertarian Party conference. I think that was in 2018, was it?
I think so, yeah. I think that's right. Anything changed with you since then?
Probably nothing major other than probably becoming a little bit more radically libertarian year by year. But I think that's what happens to everyone who becomes a libertarian. It's a bit of a rabbit hole, isn't it?
It is. I was just about to say the only thing that's changed with me is I'm less conservative, more libertarian, to the point where I'm like, the government, I'm literally arguing about everything the government's doing. I'm like, no.
Yeah, I can't switch on the news anymore, unfortunately, just because by the end of it, I'm just seething with rage. So
I still watch the BBC, but it just gives me pointers. And then I don't know if you saw the Family Guy episode, What Grinds My Gears? It gives me a lot. BBC gives me a lot of, material ideas.
Yeah, so, well, avoid it at all cost, I would say, but,
Literally. I intend for all the questions to remain the same for each party. I think I'll just point this out, with a few variations, of course, that have been agreed beforehand. So I'll start with an easy one. What is the history of your party?
Okay, so we're relatively speaking a new party that were really only established as the UK Liberty Party in July last year, 2019. Okay. Prior to that, the party did have a small and unknown presence online as a party called Individual First, but the party basically rebranded to be a little bit more open and a little bit more specific in terms of politics rather than a more philosophical bent. And we've basically spent that time since July, about 6 or 8 months, building up our systems and growing our social media presence in order to kind of snowball the party in the direction that we want it to go, obviously trying to attract existing libertarians to the cause and trying to sell them on our system and sell them on our direction and our vision for what we hope the party will become.
That's absolutely fine. It's always good to find, of course, dedicated individuals and groups like yourself that are actually out there fighting the good fight for liberty. I was going to I'm glad you brought it up. I did a bit of digging around. There's not much, so that's a good thing.
It's always a good thing. All good, whatever you dug up.
No, all it was literally is just on the history of your party, like you said, founded in 6th of October 2016. Like you've just said, it was under a different name at that point, because it had also found out, of course, you changed the name on the Electoral Commission on June the 14th. But again, you've pointed that out. So you've pretty much answered all the points I was going to raise there.
Yeah, well, we don't have a long history, so this section is quite a short one, but hopefully we'll have a more robust discussion about principles and that sort of thing.
That's the bit we're moving on to. So I'll read out what it says on your website, and that'll lead into the question. Is that all right?
Yeah.
So it says on the UK Liberty Party, every policy we introduce will be a part of our SteppingStones concept for moving continually closer towards protecting individual rights, enabling a laissez-faire capitalism, and achieving a constitutionally limited government, destination free minds, free markets and liberties. So going from that, I'm going to take it that your core principles are free minds, free markets and a constitutional limited government. Would that be right?
Yes, indeed it is. Yeah.
I'll let you, of course, elaborate on them further if you'd like.
Yeah, sure. So they're basically the fundamental tenets or principles of libertarianism. Although we like to identify ourselves more with liberty and the concept of liberty than the kind of political philosophy of libertarianism.
No, I get
At
that.
root, we're a philosophy first party, not a politics first party. We derive the politics from the philosophy. Myself and Kevin, who's the party leader and the founder of the party, are objectivists. And so we derive a lot of the kind of policy direction and the principles of the party from objectivism, though, of course, objectivism filters out across all the different spheres and influences of libertarianism, and so
Yeah.
it really is kind of a broad church for many different people, many different shades, be they on the left or right, anyone who wants to reduce the power and influence of the state. As I mentioned, because we start from a philosophical perspective, we do come at this with a little bit more of as I said, philosophical angle. So our first point is always to argue the moral reason for liberty and freedom and individual rights rather than the kind of political pragmatic reason. And for that reason, we don't tend to focus as much on the economic arguments, which in any case don't seem to really resonate with the population that much. But we do try to focus on the life aspect and the moral aspect, and try to as well as inform people about issues of choice and free will and human rights, individual rights. Sorry, we also try to kind of inform people about how to live as well as what to do in the political sphere. So that's our kind of unique angle, I suppose.
So you've taken what I'd say is a good indicator from. We were at the same conference, 2018, when
Mm-hmm.
there was a speaker there, and he says that the only way libertarians are going to succeed is coming from the heart and not from the mind. And
I
that's what I'm going to take from what you've just said there. It's not a bad position, because I think sometimes libertarianism can it's on a political stage, like you said, can be a little bit dogmatic. Economically, it doesn't come across as caring, so people automatically turn away from it. But instead, choosing to, of course, approach things like liberty, freedom, people always want that. Look what's happening now with the police state. That's what I'm going to call it. I know it's not to the degree, but it's getting there,
Yeah.
and it's riling up everybody in a good way.
Well, I think the main issue, as you mentioned, with the kind of unfeeling nature of libertarianism sometimes, is that a lot of these topics that we like to focus on, mainly economics, tend to be very dry subjects, and they
Yeah.
tend to get bogged down a lot in, for example, a lot of what's the word? I can't think of the word. Like
Um,
slogans and that sort of thing, and
yeah.
language which is very technical, and it can be very difficult when you're arguing for what is right. Practically speaking, economically speaking, it's very difficult to then switch focus and argue why that is moral, and it's difficult for people, I think, as well, to who have never been educated formally in any kind of economics, to make the logical connections from there. Obviously, economics being essentially the study of consequences and
Yeah.
of the ripple effect of decisions. People don't tend to think in that way. They haven't really been educated, especially in this country, in state education,
God no.
to think economically and to think, if we do this now, which seems like a very robotic thing to do, either not have a minimum wage or lower taxes or whatever else it might be, that actually does have a knock-on effect, which has a moral, positive, human outcome. It's very difficult to get that across at the same time as explaining very difficult concepts. So I think, as you say rightly, starting from the moral perspective and not necessarily focusing on emotion, but really giving passion to the
Yeah.
idea of rational thought, and giving passion and emotion back into the idea of what sometimes seems like a kind of robotic insistence on rationalism and reason. I think that's definitely important for getting a message across.
You've got to start somewhere, and like starting, of course, from a topic that's too technical to begin with, like the
Mm-hmm.
economy, big turn off. Let's start on the core principles of freedom and liberty. Um,
Yeah.
Constitutional limited government. Do you want to elaborate on that? I've got a pretty clear understanding what it is that you mean by that, but just for, of course, the people listening, what is it the party means by it?
Yeah, so I mean, I personally have deliberated on this for a while about whether it's necessary, and has essentially come to the conclusion that it is. The idea basically is that the government ought to be bound by certain rules or certain restrictions upon the powers that it can hold. We look at, for example, the American Constitution,
Yeah.
which for many years has managed to constrain the government in many different ways from doing things that it ought not to do. Good examples of this would be the First Amendment being the right to free speech. And of course, in America, it would be considered unconstitutional for the government to punish anyone for speech-related crime. Whereas here, for example, a couple of years ago, we had the case of Count Dankula, who
Yeah.
was arrested, charged, and fined for teaching his dog to raise its paw, which I thought was very funny. It was a joke,
Well, that was
and
it. It was just a
he was
joke.
punished for that. And I felt that was wrong. And that goes on. That was obviously a very high-profile case, but that goes
Yeah.
on continually, and our police exercise powers continually against the speech of the people in this country. And so one of the principles that might go into a constitution, for example, would be that the government has no power over the domain of speech. And you can obviously build in exceptions to that, maybe for the incitement to violence or whatever else it might be. Those are debates that you can have with regards to what goes in the Constitution. But the fundamental idea is that the Constitution binds the government in specific ways, and I would have it bound to the utmost degree that it could possibly be bound. And other people might have something a little bit more fluid, but certainly we need something codified in this country. We don't have anything that's specifically limiting in its scope. The government can exercise whatever powers it so chooses to exercise, and any of the kind of ancient rights that we were given through habeas corpus or Magna Carta, any of those kind of principles
Yeah.
can and are being dismissed on the fly, essentially. So there's an importance to this which is not often discussed in British politics, but I think will over the next few years start to come to the fore a little bit more. We know the Brexit Party, for example, are campaigning on a platform for the instantiation of a constitution, and so I think if more mainstream figures start to talk about this, and if libertarian or liberty movement parties do start to get their act together with regards to selling it to the population, then it will become an issue that we actually talk about, and it will become something that I think the population may begin to understand is necessary.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the Magna Carta, because if you didn't, I was going to pop the question, of course, well, what would you say to the people that claim the Magna Carta is our written constitution? So I'm glad, of course, that you've pointed out that that has just been eroded away, along with habeas corpus, for quite a long time. I think the most prevalent in people's minds was Brexit. That was the key point when it became real to people that we actually don't have liberty in this country. But they don't in America either. There is erosion there as well. You mentioned the First Amendment rights and free speech, but they are eroding away all the rights that are codified within their constitution by implementing legislation. So what's there to say, of course, that even if we have a constitution in this country, that government will just not legislate to override it?
Yeah, it's quite possible. I mean, that's the old phrase, isn't it? That either
Yeah.
the Constitution has permitted the American federal government as it exists now, or it has not constrained it, in which case the Constitution isn't worth the paper that it's written on. And there's a good case in that. My counterpoint to that would be that no document that we prepare for the government, no constitutional document, is going to be perfect. Humans aren't infinitely wise, they're not omniscient, and so it's going to be very difficult to actually construct something which takes account of all the possible loopholes and deviations that the government in the future might take. However, if you look at what the American Constitution has done for America over the period of 300-400 years that it's been in place, it has yielded outcomes for liberty far in excess of other countries which have not adopted similar principles. And so the idea that a government may arise in spite of such a document, while I accept that, the process is much slower. And I think the cultural aspect of that as well is that the cultural effect of having a constitution and basing a kind of collective identity, or at least a collective culture around which people can gear themselves, individually speaking, allows for a pushback in the population that you just don't get here. So, for example, with the issue of firearms ownership, the Second Amendment, obviously a very controversial topic in America at the moment, but compared to here, where most of the population are placated with every new firearm law that comes into place and every new restriction, we simply don't have that passion and that level of concern with regards to self-defense that the Americans do. And so there's other effects to having a document like that other than the mere political, and it is cultural and it is personal. And I think that those would be broadly positive, even if the document was flawed, which inevitably it would be in some regard.
Yeah. Free minds and free markets. Do you want to cover those briefly? Of course, with free markets, I assume the principle basically is that the markets ultimately can determine what's best, and government interventionism generally isn't a good thing. Am I getting the premise right with that?
Broadly speaking, yes. I mean, again, we come at it from a philosophical perspective, from the perspective of individual rights. It just so happens that, broadly speaking, market outcomes do seem historically to be better than all other forms of economic arrangement, whether that be by brutish warlord rule or by bureaucratic command. It just happens to be the fact, and there may be some kind of moral reason for this, which is that the ability of humans to manifest themselves and their choices in the world realizes more human outcomes, and that could be an argument that would be put forth. Our argument is basically starts from free minds moving on to free markets. So we take the perspective that free minds, that is the ability to use reason and the ability to choose to exercise free will, is actually necessary for every individual man's survival. You take this from the root of the issue, which is that, yes, we live in a society, or more specifically, we make up a society. We live in developed civilizations. And so you can look at that perspective and say, well, we're part of a network. But the truth is, at root, if we were stuck on a desert island alone with no one else there, we would have to exercise certain fundamental, you might say instinctive, but certainly natural processes, which are the processes of reason and production, to survive. Now, that basically comes with a morality of the mind, essentially. So what is conducive to human flourishing and happiness? What makes us human? And how then do we live a life which is happy, and a life which is productive, and a life which has purpose? And there are, objectively speaking, certain principles, certain virtues that one can exercise to deliver that. Moving on then to the free markets, there's only one system conducive to the idea of free minds, and that is free markets, because morally, capitalism or free market, laissez-faire capitalism, is the only system conducive to free choice. So that's our position. That's the kind of angle that we come to it from.
No, that's fine. I know it was a big question. It was just I was trying to get in as many points as I can, because I want to use the opportunity of these podcasts is for you to be able to basically sell yourself as a party. I know it's quite difficult getting yourself out there. So if we can all work together as organisations, everyone, we can at least start a pushback against what is a very left-wing liberalisation of our country.
Yes, well, I think the fundamental aspect of that is, and one of the reasons why we focus on the moral aspect is that because as you say, libertarians and the liberty movement, and generally I'd say also small state conservatives, tend to
Yeah.
focus on the technical quite a lot. They tend to focus on the economic quite a lot, and that's certainly important. I'm interested in economics myself, and have been guilty of this in the past. But we've ceded the ground of, let's say, compassion to the other side of the debate, and so every argument that we put forth is, well, that might be correct, but is it right? And that kind of moral question comes up. And so having or we believe that having a moral position to begin with, and a position of, real emotive strength that comes from a obviously reasoned and rational position, is the right way forward. Whether that proves to be the case, whether people like that, whether people adopt it and join the party, is obviously another thing entirely, but we're going with it, and we'll see how it goes.
Exactly. That actually comes in onto the next question. Where do you see the UK Liberty Party maybe in 10 years from now? What are your party's ultimate aims? Obviously, it's getting elected, but apart from that, what do you aim for your party to do?
Well, like you say, I mean, every party ultimately would like to be elected. Reasonably speaking, all we're looking for is a reduction of state power. So if it happens to be the case that our influence begins to drag, say, the population or politicians more in the direction of, say, the kind of constitution that we were talking about, decentralization, or just broad scale centralized lowering of barriers like regulations and taxes and laws and that sort of thing, then that would be progress. We know that, say, within 10 years we're not going to be in government, and
No.
I don't think anyone could reasonably expect that. So for us, as a political project, we obviously want to be, within 10 years, I mean, there's no excuse not to be the center of the liberty movement, in the same way that the Libertarian Party in the United States is there. That's the aim that a Libertarian Party has to have in this country, and so that's what we're angling towards. Whether that yields political success or not is obviously something we've got to work towards. Whether that's achievable in 10 years, given the current situation, given the current morality that's in place, broadly speaking, throughout the population and in our culture, that's a different matter. But certainly we want to be the center of the liberty movement.
Perfect. That basically covers that bit, because doing a bit of research, I did find the political project of the Liberty Movement, but you've covered that. You do have a personal project, however, Living Liberty. Do you want
Yes.
to elaborate on that?
So that's a more recent discussion that the party has had. So obviously, as I mentioned before, we've spent the last 6 to 8 months developing an online system that we can use for the party, and that people can use to campaign for the party, recruit for the party, and other such things, and also obviously growing our social media presence. But we are aware that it's going to be a very long road politically, and that it may not yield any ultimate reward. We may not get elected. Our ideas may be rejected. We may just be ignored by the media, and so these are all things that we have to consider. Alongside that, what I and a lot of other people I've had discussions with have witnessed over the past few weeks with the coronavirus matter is the lack of concern or understanding or even awareness of what is going on amongst the population, that people seem perfectly happy and willing to sell their liberty, to allow the government to do whatever it wants, whenever it wants, in whatever form that takes. And this country effectively fell to police rule, to a police state. Not quite, obviously, but basically.
Not to, of course, the historical context of a police state.
No, but in that direction far more rapidly than would be allowed under any other circumstance, in the space of a 2-minute TV broadcast. So what I've realized, and what a lot of people are starting to come around to, is that especially in the liberty movement, I think is that it's becoming an exercise in futility to campaign politically. And that doesn't mean that you should stop doing that, because it's obviously very important to try and manifest wherever you can the reductions in state power. But I feel, and our party are going to be working on some sort of hub or network or project to achieve this, that because liberty may never be realized in our lifetimes, we do need, in some regards, to insulate from the state and from society. And I don't mean that in a kind of, am I allowed to swear on this podcast?
I do try and keep I take a Peter Hitchens' point of view on the podcast, at least, of swearing sometimes degrades it. Of course, okay. Free speech by all means.
Yes, well, I won't degrade it, and I'll respect the boundaries of your thing. So I'll just say a fudge it, John Galt style gulch approach, where you just leave and don't come back. That's obviously not possible for many people, and there aren't plots of land to do that anyway.
No.
But certainly a kind of online network or an online gulch, as a friend of mine joked about it, where we can become prepared as people, and that we can advise on the adoption of a moral code which helps with the flourishing of our lives, so that we can become more prepared as people, more prepared emotionally, more prepared mentally, more prepared physically for crises, and to be insulated from state decisions, to be insulated from the tyranny of the ballot box. And in such times as crisis appears, for example, with the printing of money, which the government is doing on a mass scale, or the adoption of laws that have basically quarantined us to our homes, that we as libertarians are able to foresee these events and be prepared for them. So, as an example, to advise each other through some sort of network hub on how to invest, and how to invest wisely and sustainably, for example, in the purchasing of gold and commodity money, and that sort of thing. So giving people a platform to help each other, to support each other, to live liberty, and to actually be prepared for liberty, and be prepared to exercise liberty when it's not supposed to be possible, and when everyone else is dependent on the state, that we would not be dependent on the state. And so that's something that we need to, I think, look at quite strongly, is if we don't win, if we don't realize liberty in our lifetimes, what do? We can't just give up. We can't be dependent on the state, and we cannot be subjected to the consequences of their whims. So we need to insulate as much as possible. And so that's what the personal project, as I say, and something that various figures in the liberty movement and in the party are going to be looking at, is creating some sort of hub or network to advise people on that, to help people on that, and hopefully to make us better prepared as a group in the future, should it all come down.
Well, a bit off topic from, of course, the UK Liberty Party for a few minutes. You mentioned through your little brief explanation there, gold and quantitative easing, basically.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of the government recently? If I remember right, granted I should remember, I just wrote an article about it last night.
Mm-hmm.
Let's have a look. Let me scroll down. It's 630 billion has been printed and popped into the economy. That's more than 2008. Along with that, they've slashed interest rates down to 0.1%. And if they carry on being a fiat currency, do you not think that eventually the economy will collapse, take the government with it, and that will possibly happen within our lifetimes?
Well, it could take the government down with it, but it could also bring forth a more virulent beast. It could, we've seen the crisis, obviously the coronavirus crisis, unleash a government which can exercise whatever powers it so chooses, in the name of crisis, in the name of saving lives. And it's seen most of the population support it. It's had most of the media support it. And so the idea that a collapse of the currency would lead to a collapse of the government, would lead to an anarchist or libertarian utopia. I don't think there's evidence for that. I think it's the other way around. I think actually we will be worse off in terms of liberty outcomes if such a thing was to occur. But I think you are right to be concerned about this. And it's something, again, going back to what I said about most of the population being unaware or lacking the understanding of what's going on. Quantitative easing and the printing of money and the borrowing of money on this scale is unsustainable. And it has massive, massive knock-on effects. Just for example, the printing of money and the lowering of interest rates destroys savings, absolutely destroys them. And people, and because it's a form of, you know, stealth taxation, and because people don't notice it happening necessarily, because it manifests in prices rather than in direct charges in terms of taxes, people don't notice it's happening, but it has such a profound effect. It's a terrible, terrible policy, but you know, and it doesn't make sense either, because if you want an economy to shut down, you don't try and stimulate that economy with spending. So it seems to be counterintuitive or counterproductive to me. But
I know
government.
No, I know that it is a shame sometimes that libertarians aren't. I know, of course, you said you wouldn't discuss the economy isn't, of course, the way your party's looking at it, but the gold standard, yay or nay?
I'm broadly in favour, as you can probably imagine.
Yeah.
But I take the Austrian view of economics, and the idea of, you know, having a pool of funding or a subsistence fund as the root of your investment spending. And so, you know, commodity money, gold money, provides that guarantee. It provides something actual, something substantive. Of course, it doesn't have to be gold, but gold is obviously historically significant. You know, and it has the abundance and has the utility as physical currency. So I'm broadly in favour.
That's fine. Again, it was just more of a one-to-one question, that, again, because you brought it up before, and it relates ironically to an article I wrote last night about should we return back to the gold standard. But of course, we're not here to discuss Conservative Alliance. So,
no.
Thinking about the future, how does your party look at approaching voters of opposing political parties, in particular the Labour, Conservative and Lib Dem voters, who believe in quite authoritarian policies, anti-free market policies, and don't particularly care about individual liberty?
It's incredibly difficult, and it seems, at least in the last few weeks, to become even more so, and quite rapidly so. That the willingness of many people of all stripes, all ages, you know, all locations, to simply accept what's going on, and in fact to line up in the streets clapping the state religion, which is the NHS, seems to be, to me, not a great indication that the liberty movement are really making any kind of impact, and that libertarians and libertarian parties in this country are actually doing, you know, anything whatsoever of substance. So it's going to be tough, and hopefully, as I mentioned before, with our core principles and our morality first approach, we may find some chink in the armor where we can get through and we can start to spread these ideas. Obviously, with the kind of the other aspect of it, which is the living liberty aspect, which is not what it's going to be called, by the way, but of living our principles and manifesting them in the world and being an example to other people. Obviously, I'm not sure how far that will go either, but again, we're up against such a long time and such a long period of indoctrination and cultural acceptance of the norms that we live in now, that it's going to be a real fight and a real task to actually make any headway whatsoever. And that's why I said earlier on that it may just be the case, if our political ambitions fail, that we have to be prepared to insulate ourselves. And so we'll obviously try all the tricks in the book, so to speak, to attract as many people as possible to our cause. We have a system on our website to allow for the adoption of temporary campaigns, so we can attach ourselves to campaign groups, like, for example, fair beer pricing or fair fuel duty and stuff like that, individual policies to generate support among the population, from where we can obviously then sort of springboard. But as I say, we need to develop at the same time a more personal approach for libertarians, preach to the converted and say, this may be a waste of time, so prepare yourself for the worst, so to speak.
Yeah, no, that's fine. It's always best not having blind optimism, because then if, of course, you never get what you expected, you'd be sorely disappointed.
Yeah, well, you've got to deal with reality. That's the thing, and we can have our fantasies of grandeur, our delusions of grandeur, and pretend that we're the big dogs and that we're running a party and and that we're actually making an impact and all the rest of it. But if no one cares, no one cares at the end of the day, and you
And
have
that's it.
Exactly. You have to look at the political landscape and
see, we're not in a great position at the moment.
No.
So you've got to start from there. You've got to start from that from that acknowledgement.
No. One final question, and take it on the chin as you will. It's fair to say that the only main opposition party, competition party, who shares the same broad spectrum as yourself would be the Libertarian Party UK. What makes UK Liberty Party different from them?
Okay, well, there are some small differences in terms of the main differences substantively are approach to campaigning, approach to party organization. In terms of policy, we're probably very similar. I mean, the Libertarian Party wants a constitution. We want a constitution. The Libertarian Party in favor of gold standard. We're obviously, I think I am at least in favor of a gold standard. There are substantive similarities there with the party, between the parties. But what I think is important is that in the UK, at least, no one party in the liberty movement has discovered the right approach to kind of unite and promote the liberty movement. That's like true. The US Libertarian Party have done. We're a very disparate group. There are a lot of people who are libertarians who don't know they're libertarians because we haven't saturated the culture enough for them to know it. There's a lot of libertarians who just can't be bothered, who don't feel confident in the approaches that have been taken so far, don't want to waste their time campaigning and all that sort of thing. We haven't got our marketing messages and our media messages right over the years. And so, just because there is a Libertarian Party doesn't mean that every other liberty or libertarian-based party needs to step down, because it may be the case that the Libertarian Party is doing the wrong thing. And obviously we can't tell whether they are doing the wrong thing until it manifests or doesn't manifest in success. And so what we've decided to do is basically to change up how we do things. So the Libertarian Party adopt a more traditional party method. I've been a member of the Libertarian Party, by the way. I'm not criticizing them. Yes, exactly. I technically still am a member of them, so I'm not criticizing them.
I am a member, but I didn't ask this question to, of course, score points. It is a question I will be asking all parties, and of course not Liberty Party, because, well, it depends. If it's, let's say, for example, I hope to get the English Democrats on, who's their counterpart. So the questions are always going to be based, of course, on their appropriate counterpart. So I didn't want people to think this was a stabbing match of I'm Libertarian Party UK, you're our competition.
No, absolutely not. I mean, I'm technically still a member of the Libertarian Party, so I would never, and I've got obviously friends in the party, so I don't want to obviously have a go at them or anything like that. I will say the substantive difference, as I said before, is in approach. They do take the more traditional party method, i.e. they have local area sort of networks. They or what would you call them? Like, I don't know what they call them, libertarian local associations and that sort of thing. They have a very centralized approach, as I think the former chairman Andrew Withers said. They are authoritarians for liberty. They have a very strict organizational structure, and that works within the traditional party. The party scenario that we're in now. It works obviously for the Conservatives and the Labour Party, but our belief and the fundamental idea behind our party is that we're not a centralized centralized politically, we're not centralized philosophically. So why, as a party, should we be centralized and adopting traditional methods of party organization? And so what we did was to develop an online platform, a decentralized, online, personalized platform for engagement and activity. So our website is basically like a game, effectively. So you would go on our website, and for logging in, you would get a point, say, and that point would be added to your account. And then you would maybe send out our brochure to a friend, and you would get some points. You would maybe submit an article to the party for publication on our website and on social media, and you would get points for that. If people joined the party, you would receive you would receive extra points, and you would get a note on your account. Your membership would be upgraded from, say, bronze level to silver level to gold level, and it would give you a personal indication of what you are actually doing, and the direction of the party as under your membership. And those points would then be over time will be able to be spent, essentially. So the party obviously has a shop, it has branded merchandise at the moment, and you can spend the points on the branded merchandise. So you could get yourself a cup or a hat or whatever. And over time, as we grow as a party and we have more resources, then we can expand the range of transferables. So for example, if you wanted to make a run for Parliament, for example, which is a very expensive thing to do, it's a £500 deposit at minimum, and if you don't get 5% of the vote, you lose your money. That you could spend the points that you'd accrued over the months and years of working for the party and helping us to grow. You could spend those points on, for example, assistance with the fee, with on leaflets and other kind of money based redeemables like merchandising equipment and leafleting campaigns and all that sort of thing. So we want to be there for each individual person in the party, to give them an acknowledgement of what they're doing and actually give them an incentive to do it and rewards for doing it. And I think that's an innovative approach which no other party in this country really has managed to develop.
I don't think anyone has yet.
Yeah, and it's something we're still working on. But at the moment, I think it's a very, very good platform, a very good foundation for what the party could become and what the libertarian movement could become, which is individual people doing individual works at an individual level, which can then be scaled up using technology. I mean, it's fantastic, I think, and that's that's our our angle really in terms of direction. We're not taking the traditional approach for a party. We want to do things differently. We want to try new things, and we want you, i.e., the members, to be the center of that, to actually earn rewards for being a member, and we want to recognize that people work hard and put time in. So that's what we're doing.
And recognition is key to success.
Absolutely. And as libertarians, we're interested in economics, and we know things about, for example, incentive structures. And if there's no incentive structure in place, then no one can be bothered doing anything. Well, fair enough. Let's put an incentive structure in place and see what people would be willing to do. And maybe it'll only be for something tokenistic. Maybe it'll be for a badge or a cup or a hoodie or an umbrella or whatever else it might be. But certainly it's better than just saying, help us out, and maybe we'll achieve something, or maybe we won't, but you'll be able to go for a pint every month. It's like, no, that's not enough, I don't think. So so that's what we're doing.
Well, that was a pretty good response, very extensive as well, and
Thank
I do
you.
like the
I hope I converted you.
Yeah, I don't think you've converted me. Still, it's nothing personal. I'm still much more on the party politics stage for now. Not saying, of course, you're not, but I do have plans for my local area to stand.
Yes, well, lots of people are still in the traditionalist mindset, and I think it may be the case that mindset is what works. And certainly the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, the Lib Dems, they all operate in this, and they obviously do very well over the course of tens and hundreds of years. But we live in a new age, new era, new technology. Might as well use it and see what happens.
Exactly. Do you have anything else you'd like to raise within the podcast at all?
Well, I probably talked your ear off enough, so I might let you go. But I would just say to people just to check us out on Facebook, basically. If they want to follow the party, we put we're commenting every day, usually sarcastic commentary rather than serious political commentary, but because I'm in charge of the social
memes
media
help the world go round.
exactly. But certainly go on the Facebook page and just have a look and see whether you like our ideas. There's links to the website there, and you can see what kind of system we have in place, and whether you think that you'd actually be happy to join. It's fairly cheap, it's easy enough, and like I said, you get rewards for doing it. So fingers crossed, people like the sound of it.
And the website for people who of course aren't on Facebook is uklibertyparty.org. Well, this has been a great discussion. I'd like to thank Harley for coming on today and representing the UK Liberty Party. I've really enjoyed talking to you, and I wish you and your party all the best.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation.
It's been a pleasure to have you. I'd also like to say thank you to everyone who's been listening to the Conservative Alliance podcast. Before we go, I'd appreciate that if our listeners have enjoyed our podcast, that you hit like, press subscribe, and until next time, goodbye.